Hello, and welcome to Horrific Tales. In this show we celebrate the creation of independent authors and aspiring writers. Please like and subscribe and share these episodes so that we can help our talented friends get as much exposure as possible. We would also appreciate if you could support our artists by following them on their individual platforms and by purchasing their works. Details on how to do this are in the episode description. In this horrific tale, a community event reignites an ancient family feud. Join us now as we present The Witch's Walk by Robert Foster. The path by the river was flooded with pointed black hats and long flowing dark robes. Mothers, daughters, aunts, grandmothers, sisters and friends walked together, smiling in the evening light. The orange sky painted behind the clouds accentuated the mood, and the collective joy was palpable. A tall woman with painted-on wrinkles ascended a small hill and stood behind a makeshift podium of cardboard stacked in a heap of boys. "Look, Mummy," said the little girl, holding her mother's hand at the bottom of the hill. "Her face is green." "Yes," said the mother, "like the Wicked Witch of the West from the Wizard of Oz." The green-faced woman on the hill adjusted a microphone and spoke. "Welcome everyone to the 8th annual Mill River's Witch's Walk." Cheers from the crowd made it hard for the little girl to hear her mother, as she had to lean closer to hear the words she said. "Your grandmother, Beatrice." "My grandmother was called Beatrice?" "Yes, Catherine," said Mum. "Before the walk begins, I want to tell you about her. She was a very special woman." Catherine clutched her long wand with a sparkling star-shaped end and listened intently. She had wanted the Glend of the Good Witch crown to go along with the wand, but the stores sold out. The paper crown Mum made for her kept slipping off, but Catherine wasn't going to complain. She didn't want to hurt Mummy's feelings. "Everybody on your feet!" shouted the Green Witch on the hill. "Let the walk begin!" The women on the field nearby walked down the path, and the stragglers by the parking lot quickly filled in the gaps. Witches of all shapes and sizes came together and chatted as they strolled along the Mill River path. Witches in long black dresses, witches with fake wart-covered noses, and dozens of broom-riding witches were together, happy that it was time for their favourite tradition. "Mummy, they're starting," said Catherine. Mum resigned herself to the fact that she'd hardly gotten a word out in all the commotion. She'd tell Catherine about her grandmother later. It was time for the walk to begin. The group passed an old mill, its crumbling red brick marking the town's industrial history. Next came the town church, a large white edifice overlooking the river, a place that had bad history with witches. It served as a suitably spooky backdrop for the event. Rounding the riverbed, the group passed an abandoned stone building, resting on the edge of an eroding hill in the shadows of the old Mill River Library. Ethel waited next to the plaque reading, "Closed in 1909, and watched the little blonde girl with the paper crown. "Beatrice's little spawn thinks she's a princess," thought Ethel, scowling at the child, wishing Catherine could feel her disgust. Scratching at the brown wart on her cheek, Ethel formed her plan. The walk would finish in front of the old library, and there she would make her move. Beatrice's granddaughter would flavour Ethel's soup perfectly tonight, her bones enhancing the carrots and potatoes around them, and child meat was the tastiest kind, especially the flesh of an old enemy's kin. The witches climbed the hill and stopped in a field between the riverwalk and the old library. The sun had set, and all was lit by moonlight and strategically placed torches. There were tents and tables selling pottery, herbs, books of magic, potions, toys, brooms, and all the witch masks one could want. A line of porta-potties lined the library side of the field. "Mummy needs the bathroom," said Catherine's mother. "Wait here for me, honey. I'll only take a few minutes." Catherine adjusted her tilting paper crown, not wanting Mummy to see it fall on the ground as she walked to the smelly bathroom box. She clutched her star wand and pointed it at the nearest soccer goalpost. Under her breath, Catherine whispered, "That's..." The goalpost did not cha-cha, jitterbug, floss, or perform any movement whatsoever. Catherine didn't let it bother her. She had been distracted by her favourite smell. Out there, among the sea of tables and tents, someone was selling cocoa. She'd be sure to ask Mummy for some when she got back. "Oh," came a strained voice from the shadows of the library behind her. Catherine turned. There was no one there. "My cane," said the pained voice. "I need my cane. Can someone help me?" The voice sounded close by, near the old library. It was dark there, but someone needed help. Catherine thought it was an old woman. She took a single step towards the voice, then stopped. Mummy told her to wait here.
"It hurts so much,"
said the voice in the shadows.
"I need my cane."
Catherine usually did what Mum told her, but this seemed like an acceptable time to break that rule. Someone needed help, and her parents had always taught her that it would be helpful and caring. She walked into the shadows by the abandoned library. A hunched form in a raggedy white dress leaned on the column of the library entrance. Long, strangled grey hair blocked the figure's face as Catherine walked over.
"Hello,"
said Catherine.
"Are you okay?"
The form stood still with a hunch, but the dark, wrinkled eyes focused on the little girl. The eyes were grey like an ocean storm. The old woman's nose was too long and twisted at impossible angles. When she smiled, Catherine only saw 3 teeth in a cavernous mouth.
"Wow,"
said Catherine.
"that's a really good witch's costume." "Thank you, dearie,"
said Ethel.
"Can you help me find my cane? I can't take a step without it."
"Sure," said Catherine, immediately setting about on the quest for the fallen cane. She walked around the entrance of the empty library, checking bushes and behind benches while the old lady watched carefully. Staring out through the shadows, Ethel heard the sounds of chatting and revelry nearby. The event was bigger than she had anticipated. She had to hurry.
"Never mind, dearie,"
said Ethel.
"I'll be fine without it. Thank you for looking."
Catherine stopped her search and offered an arm for the old lady to hold. Ethel accepted the arm, and they took a few steps before she stopped and patted Catherine on her little blonde head.
"One last thing before we go out there with the others,"
said Ethel, her twisted nose an inch away from the child.
"Your heart is beating so loud it hurts my old ears."
Ethel plucked a single hair from Catherine's head, held it out in front of her mouth, and said,
"Stop it!"
Catherine's mouth dropped open as she placed a hand on her chest. She stared in confused horror at the old woman before collapsing by the library steps. Her paper crown fell off and was swept away by the wind. Ethel loomed over the fallen child and grinned. She would eat well tonight. To be sure the spell had worked properly. Ethel bent low enough to put her ear to the girl's chest. The position was painful, but she was happy with what she learned. Catherine's little heart was no longer beating.
Now all that's left is to drag her little body away.
On the field, Marnie Wasson stood alongside the abandoned library, a marshmallow cocoa in her hand. The evening had taken on a chill that she wasn't able to fight off without the drink providing inner warmth. Besides, this event always brought Marnie back to her youth, wearing the black robes, casting silly spells on her sister, and wearing fate warts. And it always ended with a cup of cocoa. Marnie didn't care if she was 34 or 10. She was not about to break tradition. It was hot chocolate time. Something brushed slightly by her foot as she looked down to find a small paper crown lying on the grass. She picked it up and looked around for the owner. Some little girl would want it back. She had taken a step towards the field when she heard a thump in the shadows behind her, towards the library. Walking through the dark patch by the abandoned Mill River Library, Marnie called out, "Hello?" She emerged on the other side of the darkness and dropped her cocoa when she saw an old lady with dangling grey hair leaning over the motionless form of a little blonde girl.
"Oh my, what happened?"
"Drat," thought Ethel.
"This spoils my plan."
Without missing a beat, Ethel turned around and put on her best worried expression.
"Oh, young lady, I'm so glad you're here. I found this little girl lying here, and she's not moving. I tried to help her, but damn my old bones, I couldn't even bend down to reach her."
Marnie rushed back through the shadow and onto the field, calling for help. It wasn't long before a tall, freckled woman ran to the front of the group and introduced herself as Rebecca, the nurse. Ethel watched as the two women bent over Catherine's motionless body and hoped the contempt didn't show on her face. The nurse's CPR wasn't going to bring the girl back from this. Ethel had learned the spell long before this Rebecca had been born. Rebecca said something to Marnie that Ethel couldn't hear as a group of people gathered around, drawn by the commotion. It was clear a moment later when Marnie made a phone call and said, "Old library, heart stopped, send an ambulance."
"Useless. She's already gone. There's nothing you can do about it."
There was a loud wail from the shadows as Catherine's mother burst into the scene. A woman in a blue blouse wrapped her arms firmly but carefully around her, whispering, "We have to let the nurse do her work. We have to give her space." Rebecca breathed into Catherine's little mouth. gave compressions, more breaths, compressions. A professional who would not stop until someone could take over, or until...
"I found the defibrillator,"
shouted the green-faced woman from the announcements. She held a square yellow case in her hand, which she placed on the ground by Rebecca. Rebecca wasted no time opening the case and removing 2 patches, which she affixed to Catherine's body. One patch on the upper chest and the other by her opposite ribs. Ethel watched Catherine's mother sobbing as the nurse shouted, "Clear!" and delivered a shock to the little girl. From her vantage point at the edge of the crowd, Ethel had trouble seeing the nurse's reaction after she'd shocked the child. Moving for a better view, Ethel did her best to blend into the crowd of women amassed by the old library entrance. She passed a woman who was too tall and another who was too wide to see around, but finally jostled her way into a position from which she could see clearly. Rebecca was stroking Catherine's hair and telling her that everything was okay and an ambulance was coming.
"Drat! The child survived!"
Ethel shuffled away from the crowd and passed a woman in a white sweater who placed a gentle hand on her shoulder.
"It's a miracle,"
said the woman in the white sweater. Ethel didn't have the energy to fake a smile. She only had 3 teeth left. I didn't care to bear them for this person. She shuffled away from the group and onto the small street nearby. It was no miracle. It was that blasted technology. The defibrillator. No one had those things in the old days, and when little girls died, they stayed dead, like they were supposed to. Ethel grumped her way across Pleasant Street and onto the darkness of Hickory Lane. Beatrice's granddaughter had survived, and now she would never have her revenge. It hadn't even been a battle of powers like it was back in the day. Ethel hated to remember, but the sting of Beatrice's flying thorns made her scratch at her face. Some wounds never go away. Ethel caught flashing red lights out of the corner of her eye. Bright crimson light revolved off the old library walls 2 blocks away and spread itself in the road below, inviting her to return to the scene. The ambulance was teasing her, laughing, reminding Ethel of her failure. They'd toss the child in the back of the ambulance with her mum and a couple of paramedics, then whisk her away.
"To the hospital."
Ethel stopped walking. They were taking Catherine to the town hospital. Ethel had been there several times over the decades and remembered the layout well. There was a main corridor with most patient rooms in it. Intensive care was on the western end of the corridor and the paediatric ward on the eastern side. The hospital was no fortress, and Ethel knew exactly where they'd take the little girl. Even though she had survived, Catherine was weaker than ever. The doctor would put her in a bed and have her stay overnight. All Ethel had to do was wait for the right moment.
"Then I can finish the job."
Ethel grinned. All she had to do was wait. A digital clock by Catherine's bedside read 12:18 a.m. Catherine's mother gazed emptily at the bright red numbers, watching them blur as her vision weakened. Her head slumped forward, leading towards her sleeping daughter in the hospital bed below. "Mrs. Morris?" Catherine's mum lifted her head, blinked twice, and beheld a woman in light blue scrubs standing in the doorway. She said, half asleep. "Can I get you a pillow and a blanket?" asked the nurse. Mrs. Morris shook her head from side to side and forced herself to sit up straight. "Dr. Emmons says Catherine's heart has been beating steadily for the past 3 hours. She just needs rest." The nurse paused before saying, "It would be good for her if you got some rest too." "No thanks, I won't be sleeping tonight." The nurse gave up and walked away. Mrs. Morris didn't notice until a minute later when she slapped herself on the cheek, forcing her eyes open. The nurse had left. Catherine was still clutching her little plastic wand as she slept, and all was still, all except. Mrs. Morris tapped Catherine on the shoulder, nudging her awake. "Sorry, sweetie, but it's time to wake up." Catherine sat up slowly in the hospital bed and rubbed her sleepy eyes. "Do you remember what we talked about?" Catherine nodded. "Good," said Mum. "See the ladybug on the wall? That's the one." Catherine pointed her star wand at the ladybug and spoke.
"In from Grandma, out through me."
The ladybug froze in the wall. "You might as well reveal yourself," said Mrs. Morris. "We've got you now." The ladybug blinked out of existence and was instantly replaced by the hunchbacked form of old Ethel. Eyes darting around the room, Ethel found her limbs immobile. She couldn't move an inch. "Good job, honey," said Mrs. Morris, petting Catherine's outstretched arm as she walked towards a frozen old woman. "Keep her just like that." Ethel's eyes grew wider as Catherine's mother walked up in front of her. "Before she died, my mother told me you would come one day. Not for me. She knew I hadn't inherited the gift, but Catherine did." A glimpse of Catherine pointing her star wand, holding the hag in place with her young will, and Beatrice's old magic. Mrs. Morris said. I think we can both agree that my daughter is more powerful than you are. Ethel's mind was racing.
What did this woman have planned? Would she tell the child to kill her? How's the little girl doing this?
She received one answer when Mrs. Morris turned back to face her and asked the question. Who do you think gave her that wand?
Beatrice!
There was no question in Ethel's mind that her old nemesis had imbued the cheap plastic wand with power. Even in death, Beatrice was prepared. We have been preparing for you for years, but I never thought you'd be crazy enough to try anything in public, said Mrs. Morris. She shook her head as if it could erase a thought. Let me explain how ready we are. Sweetie, what do we have under the house? Bottle, said Catherine. That's right, a large bottle, filled with toenail clippings, hair and saliva. A witch's bottle. Ethel couldn't believe what she was hearing. She hadn't heard of people using witches' bottles since the early 1700s. Mrs. Morris was indeed prepared. The bottle rendered any attack on Catherine at home useless. The anthropomorphic bottle, filled with organic material, would draw witch's magic to it and trap it inside, under the house. Blink, if you understand me, said Mrs. Morris, leaning close to Ethel's face. Ethel blinked once. Just in case that's not enough for you, I'll tell you about the double-barreled shotgun I have in the house, and my husband George, who's a college linebacker and still has the build. Then there's the dog. Honey, what kind of dog is Rufus? Doberman Pinscher. That's right, sweetie, a big Doberman Pinscher who hates strangers. Blink if you understand me. Ethel blinked once.
Mommy, my arm is getting tired.
Mrs. Morris turned to look at her little girl. Catherine's arm was still pointed straight at Ethel, the star one projecting the power inside. The little girl was successfully wielding her grandma's old magic, but she was only a child. It's okay, honey, said Mrs. Morris. This will be over soon. Turning back to Ethel, she said, my baby's arm is getting tired, so I'm going to tell her she can rest soon. But I want you to know something first. The only reason I won't tell her to kill you right now is that I don't want her to grow up with death on her conscience. But when she lowers her arm, if you do anything other than turn and run for the door, I will snap your neck before you know it. Stepping closer, glaring into the old woman's face, she said, Blink, if you understand me. Ethel didn't know how many times she blinked, maybe as many as 20 times. Fear made it impossible to keep track. This crazy mum meant every word she said. Put your arm down, Catherine. Our guest won't be staying. Catherine put down her arm and sighed. Ethel turned and ran. Her old legs ached and she feared that the crazy woman would be right behind her, reaching to grab hold of her brittle neck. By the time she reached the hospital room door, she was too panicked to think of transforming. A fly or a mouse would have an easier time escaping the hospital's winding corridors, but she stayed in human form, unable to think of anything other than reaching the exit. Back in the room, Mrs. Morris sat by the hospital bed and wrapped a loving arm around Catherine.
Mummy, will that scary lady come back?
Catherine's eyes were wide with worry. No, honey, said Mum, kissing Catherine's forehead, because we're stronger than her. Mrs. Morris held up an open palm and Catherine high-fived it. Do you remember when I started to tell you about your grandma? Catherine nodded. She's the one that put the magic in there, so you could use it. She tapped the star-shaped wand. Catherine gulped at the cheap plastic toy that enabled her to wield power she didn't understand. She was very special, just like you are.
Does that mean?
Catherine trailed off, lost in thought. Yes, honey, one day you'll be just as powerful as your grandma was. 3 blocks away from Bell River Hospital, Ethel trudged along the sidewalk, no longer capable of running. She wheezed with every step, trying not to pass out. She'd been defeated by a little girl, a child. The thought stung, but she couldn't keep it out of her head.
All these years seeking Beatrice's granddaughter, only to fail so extraordinarily.
Ethel felt lightheaded and stopped by the edge of a field, not realizing how far she had walked until she beheld a large white goalpost next to her. She was back at the field marking the end point of the witch's walk. Most people had long since gone home, but even in the post-midnight darkness, Ethel could see the moving shapes of a few stalwart stragglers. On the far side of the field, two tall shapes descended towards the river, with a small black silhouette dancing between them. On the field by the goalpost, a girl with a pointed black hand was running around with a multicoloured lollipop in her hand, licking as she ran. Ethel's stomach rumbled.
I still need to eat.
Her failure with Catherine was fresh in her mind, but Ethel wouldn't give up the search for sustenance. Her growling stomach demanded child flesh, and it didn't have to be Beatrice's kin. Any little brat would do. The girl with the lollipop ran in front of her as Ethel looked around. There were no adults in sight. She crept slowly towards the little girl. The child turned quickly. The pointed black hat tilted, and a long lock of bright red hair spilled out the back.
No, the red ones inherit the powers far too frequently.
Ethel stepped away from the horrible red hair, bright even in the darkness. Red-haired girls were known to inherit their ancestors' powers uncannily often, and Ethel didn't dare take the risk. Ethel crept along the edge of the field, her head hanging low. She wiped a tear from her cheek and stared at her wet hand, proof of her failure. From the trees ahead came a repetitive thwopping noise, and a girl's happy chanting. 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4. Advancing slowly, Ethel peeked around the trees and beheld a child, perhaps 7 years old, joyfully skipping rope, alone in the small woods. A quick look around did not reveal any waiting adults nearby. Most likely some foolish mother had walked away to chat with a friend, thinking her child was safe among all the witches. 5 potatoes, 6 potatoes, 7 potato more. Closer. The girl was not wearing a hat. Closer. The moonlight broke through the trees as the child jumped in its rays. Brown hair. Ethel smiled. Perhaps she would get her meal, after all. Well, we hope that you enjoyed our latest horrific tale. If you want to keep up to date with future episodes, then subscribe to our email list for our weekly newsletter. You can also give the channel support by visiting our merchandise store or using the affiliate links in the episode description. We would also appreciate it if you took a moment to support our contributor artists who very kindly lend their talents to this show. Check out the links in the description to see how you can do this. Well, that just leaves me to say, until next time my friends, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.